everyone. Okay, I'm going to paint for you. But just before I start, I want to just go over the topics I want to cover and points I want to make that I hope will prove in some way helpful to you, or at least interesting. So it's an urban landscape, as you can see by the sketch that I did earlier today. We're in Paris, France. This effect that I want to paint could happen anywhere, though. We don't have to be in Paris, but the reference material was from there, and I was recently there and just was really taken by that. Let me show you a reference photo. This is the photo. It's somewhat the root of what I'm painting. It's not a copy of the photo by any means. I've made quite a few changes, but the overall atmosphere is one thing I'm trying to capture. It was a winter day and low in color, but not necessarily low in interest. That's one of the things I want to cover. I personally love painting the colors of winter. I think they can be beautiful, subtle, but no less interesting than those of spring or summer or autumn. But moreover, it was a foggy day. So obviously what happens in a foggy day is the things that are more near to you are more visible. The things further away become less in focus, less saturated in value and color, less visible. So as I'm always saying to my groups, I think one of our opportunities or jobs even as an artist is not to paint exactly what we look at, but to interpret what we look at, the world around us, and paint what we see, what we really are feeling. I love this feeling on a foggy day of this exaggerated sense of distance and the mystery that fog can bring. So I want to take this reference and exaggerate those feelings, that experience a bit. To do so, this is a very, very small, quick little sketch, but I think in conjunction with the photo, you can see where I'm headed. I want to really emphasize the clarity, the value, saturation, and the harder edges that may appear in the painting here in the foreground. And I want to de-emphasize those things, the edges, the values, the clarity, for anything further away. Less so here, less so here, less so. So the further we go back into space, the less obvious, the less clear everything becomes. And that's another one of my, I guess you could call it obsessions as a painter, but at least something that I'm always playing with. Just the knowledge that we're drawing and painting on a flat two-dimensional surface. We have only width and height, obviously, to play with. So I think as a painter, certainly I don't believe in rules. You don't have to do this. But it's one thing I think we should consider, the opportunity we have to portray the illusion of that sense of three-dimensionality of space and distance is just something I'm really fixated on. So as always, when going into a painting, I think if you have that much that I've laid out, at least as an intent, as sort of a direction you want to go, it just makes everything else you have to do much more clear. And simply put, that means I know I don't want anything in the background to be too in focus, too dark in value, or too bright in color. So just knowing that, just having a clear intent, even if it's only a partial intent, but just some idea of where you want the painting to go is just so helpful. Doesn't mean it can't change. Doesn't even mean it shouldn't change. You can't plan everything, especially in watercolor. It's a medium that has a mind of its own. So having a big picture idea helps me a great deal. So what I've done is flip the painting over. As you can see, I'm painting on my easel is sloped, a little flatter than I normally have it, but about 25 degrees. And I'm doing a light wash up from clear water at the bottom. Tiny bit of yellow ochre I dropped in. I want some subtle color variations. So I don't want no color, but I want subtle color and not particularly saturated color. Then a little band of cobalt teal, sort of a bluish green color, and then it's a cobalt blue teal by Daniel Smith, and then this is a mineral violet by Holbein at the top of the sky. So really, it's one of my favorite complements, this cool teal blue and the slightly warmish gray mineral violet. I think it's a really great color combination for winter scenes, fog in particular. I mean, it's a complement, warm and cool, but it's a bit off, a bit a minor key, if you will. So it's a little more subtle. If it works, it looks a little more sophisticated. But it really, to me, feels like winter. Those soft teals and gentle violets. Nothing too high in chroma, nothing too bright. And then I really want to maintain as much light down here as I can, further down the street at the bottom along the horizon line. So this will create a slight sense of atmosphere, but also a sky dome a bit curving up over your head. The darker tones, of course, are going to happen here when I'm done. And this should just be a nice unifying warm to cool wash. Did it upside down to utilize gravity to pull that wet wash down the page. Don't be afraid to turn your boards over or sideways. Whatever way helps you get the color to run in the way you want it to go. Gravity in watercolor is really another tool, just like a pencil or a paintbrush or a pigment, because water runs downhill, I'm led to believe. You can use that to your advantage. You add more gravity on a very wet wash, it'll pull the color down quicker, obviously. Flatter, it will take it a longer amount of time. So by doing that, you can modulate how fast one color bleeds into another. I tend to do very little mixing in the palette of colors. Rather, I use pure color, allow them to mix wet and wet on the surface of the paper. So the speed at which they run together is a big factor in how I paint and the effects that I want. The downside of flipping your board over is if it's still too wet and you flip it back over, the top of the wash could backwash in and cause a bleed or a line or blossom at the top, which I don't want. So I'm waiting a bit till the pigment settles into the fibers of the paper a little more. A good sign is when the shine goes off a wet wash. That means it's not dry, but it's dry enough you can probably turn the page around. So I think we're just about there. Still a little buckled, so you can see it's not fully dry yet, but it's more damp than wet. I'm using a Boahong paper, rough surface, Chinese all cotton paper. It's very bright white and very distinctive texture. I wanted a very textured paper for this painting. I just think as I proceed, dry brush marks, I'll be able to utilize the texture of the paper to sort of imply a lot more atmosphere and layer on that sense of mystery that I'm going for. Now the top of the bridge is going to be a little bit darker, but anyway, I'm going to do a similar graded wash along the bottom, but just start mostly with clear water here. the bridge is closer in general overall, so we will see more of it, more color, more, I don't want to use the word detail, but that's true, a little bit more detail, a little bit more of the specifics. I'm using one of my signature brushes, a W Schaller Neef brush. It's a mop. These come in large to small sizes. Beautiful brushes, hold a lot of water. They're all synthetic, but they mimic the behavior of natural hair brushes. So no squirrels or mink or anything were harmed in the production. But I'm painting this wash a bit on the side so that I can get some of these skip marks, just to begin to add some of that texture, hint of light glistening off the surface of the bridge adds a little bit of, again, I really hesitate to say detail, but it almost implies detail without really being detail or having to paint any. So here, that's a raw umber, so just a soft, warm tone. This is a little bit of just viridian. This is a little perylene green, just sort of a greens, obviously, but not terribly dark or saturated. I'm dropping them into the water. I want a green haze to the water, but I don't want it to look, I don't need it to look too bright green. I think that would look out of place. Under the bridge, there'll be some shadowing, obviously, but I don't want it to all just be solid black or dark necessarily. So I'm just dropping into the paper some cobalt blue and some more of the mineral violet I used up top, just letting it run. This is one of the great things watercolor can do, that one area can just merge really fluidly and organically into another. So one thing seems to just become another. If that narrative suits you, and on a foggy day, generally it does. There's a lack of clarity often between the identity of one thing and another thing. So this wash is quite wet still, obviously, so in the foreground of it, I'm just going to play in the water here, the wet wash. Drop in some deeper. This is a Van Dyke brown. It's a little bit of it's a Daniel Smith color, earthy light red, which is aptly named because it is a light red that's very earthy. Again, don't want to get too bright, so nothing like cadmium or anything. And then just to begin to indicate some brighter, slightly brighter tonalities in the foreground. These are just some base initial washes. More umber and Van Dyke brown are just sort of merging together here on the paper surface. Try not to be too picky or paint between the lines, but just general tonalities. As we recede into the distance, I'm using a watered down umber, so it's still warm but much lighter. And I'll drag that over the wall along the edge of the river. I really want to play up the sense of mystery, if I can, in this painting, where edges aren't necessarily terribly well defined. A lot of soft, so-called lost edges, I hope. But yeah, this general mottled, warm, cool, toggling look is what I'm after at this stage. So I'm not describing specific shapes so much, just allowing a lot of this wet work to happen. That's some more of the mineral violet, and here just a very watered down additional bit of neutral tint in this closest shadow arch under the bridge. Again, using gravity as much as I can to just pull the water around and let it run and merge very organically. Not so bad. The brush just skipped over and left some of these white marks. I could get rid of them very easily, but I kind of like them, so I'm keeping some of them and emphasizing them a bit. I think especially here, they're just little subtle things that will help animate the painting overall. Here in the deep underarch, I'm dropping in a little of that darker version of the cobalt teal I used up in the sky to sort of echo that color and help subtly tie the top and the bottom of the painting together. But also, this could read as some subtle bounced light off the water's surface up under the shadowy bridge. Another one of my obsessions with watercolor is I'm asked very often, how do you paint light in watercolor? And the frustrating but honest answer is you don't. You don't paint light. The light's already there. The paper, the watercolor paper, provides all the light you're gonna have. Watercolor is a subtractive technique in that we subtract away parts of the overall amount of light that we began with. So it's really working the inverse as you might in acrylic or oil for the most part, where you can use white paint and you often start with your darkest darks and then build your painting up from dark to light. Not always, but sometimes. Watercolor is, generally speaking, done the opposite, building up from light to dark. Again, not always. Some watercolor painters do start in with their darkest darks. I generally don't. I usually start with the lightest light, which is the preserved unpainted paper, then begin to add my light midtones, my darker midtones, and finally my darkest darks. So what's happening so far is a bit of preserved white light, little dots, but area here. Everything else is so far mid-tone, light mid-toned, medium, and darker mid-tones. My darkest darks, again, not always, but very often have, they will have the darkest values by definition, but they will also often have the hardest edges and crisper edges that make them feel more forward and foregrounded than other objects. It's just one of the other things you can do to imply three-dimensionality in your work. So while I was messing around down there, the sky wash I put on earlier is pretty dry. Now what I want to do is rough in these buildings across the river, on the other side of the river, the other side of the street. And the main thing I want not to do is to make them too dark. I do not want them to be too dark, and I definitely don't want them to be too detailed. Any extraneous detail, any too many sharp edges, defined details, or deep values are going to make these buildings pull forward and feel much closer to the viewer than you might want. So, again, having a clear intention before you begin is key. So that is just a flat brush. I applied a few strokes in a dry brush manner, fading the tone out as it goes down because I want to save that as just mist along the horizon. That was raw umber, and this is more of that mineral violet at the top. So I'll have little hints of identity, architectural identity, a sense of detail here and there, but nothing terribly specific. Having the profile of the tops of these buildings read a little bit clearer through the mist, in this case, I think is what I want for compositional harmony in the painting. I think a little bit of clarity up here will balance off a greater amount of clarity there, and you'll get a really nice diagonal narrative. Another kind of painting, I could see fading this out even more, but I think this is the way to go. I'm using another one of my mops, but this is a smaller one, so you can get a fairly nice point. And it's obviously better for edge work and that sort of thing. So again, a little hint of the profile of the building. Again, I'm trying to walk the line between being a little bit careful and a little bit loose and careless. So I have bits of clarity and bits of lack of clarity, which really often does feel like the way a foggy day makes you observe things. You think you see it, but you don't really, or things sort of seem to come in and out of focus. This is a very inexpensive flat brush. I'm a big proponent of exploring the value of certain inexpensive brushes, but cheaper brushes, they're all synthetic, generally are going to hold much less water. So for certain kinds of dry brush work, for example, like I'm doing now, that can be an advantage, meaning they're going to run out of water quicker, and you can achieve some of those effects where it just scrapes across the surface of the paper and leaves those speckles and character marks. A higher quality brush that holds too much water would make a more solid line all the way down. And that's sometimes what you want, but in this case, it was not. So again, I want this hint of almost a misty effect behind the bridge here. So I want everything going up to just grow up out of that mist. So I want very little definition at the bottom. So I'm taking a paper towel and even softening those edges a bit so that looks even more improbable and mysterious as it grows up into the sky. Is that dark enough? Do I need anything more? At this stage of the painting, I think no. To me, it looks just about right. I can always come back later as I start to develop the foreground and the darker areas of the painting. I can revisit that and add more identity, but I'm hoping I don't. I'm not thinking it's going to need it. I'll do a similar treatment across the street, although this somewhat lower building falls behind these what are going to be dark light standards. So, and it's also a little further away even than this building. So similar treatment, but even a tiny bit lighter. So I'm going to use my flat brush, the mineral violet. I put some water in the brush first so that the color will be even softer. Similar treatment though, a little bit of clarity on the skyline of this building. These chimney pots sticking up, I can kind of indicate just with the edge of a flat brush without getting too specific. The only thing to consider here is that we do see a bit of this building as it recedes even further down the street. So that tells me I'm going to toggle away from that violet and introduce a little bit more of this teal, which will just sort of help make this building bleed into the environment a little bit more effectively. And as far as mark making or brush application, down here, I'm going to be way less specific even than I was here and just sort of dry brush up into the background to try to feather that building out altogether so you really cannot see where it terminates, where the end of it is. Similar treatment here. This is a little of that umber, fairly dry brush approach, saving a little of that mist. And I think that's okay. I'll bounce the corner just a little. I think that'll be good. Again, with the paper towel at the very bottom, doesn't matter that much, but I'll just soften the edge and help that effect of it feathering away into pure atmosphere. So not done, of course, but I think you're starting to get the sense that these buildings almost feel like they're growing up out of the mist and they look mysterious, almost as if they're hanging from the sky. I love that look. There are some trees here. I think compositionally they're a good idea, needed, but very, very easy to overdo. So I'm going to just take a deep breath and hope I do a good job of indicating them without describing them. I want to paint in the trees now while this building is still wet, so that I'll get a nice toggle between some wet on dry and some wet and wet, some variety of edges, so that these trees look connected to everything else and also not terribly specific unto themselves. I'm using this liner brush, fat at the bottom, quills sticking out at the top, very little water. It's laying it on its side, dragging it across this very rough paper to get these intentionally kind of scrappy, suggestive marks rather than describing precisely these trees, to just get the idea of a tree. These are winter trees, so a few dry leaves, but not any foliage to speak of, and lots of little brambles, twigs, and that sort of textural thing. So I'm just using some of these browns I've been using, umbers, and it looks okay. It looks a little bit too specific in here, maybe. Or paint quickly and then assess. Definitely want these to fade out as they come down into the painting. So this is my little mist bottle. I'll just add a little mist to the bottom. That'll soften up some edges, encourage these tones to run together. Again, the paper towel to just help feather out that effect as it comes down. I'm a little indecisive whether this looks too crisp and clear or fuzzy enough. I think generally it's okay, but it's still wet, so if I wanted to manipulate it, now would be the time. I think I'll just take some of it with a paper towel, soften it, and then leave the rest. That's not so bad. Then you get a subtle toggle between clarity and lack of clarity, and very minimal that I think in this particular case it's enough. But at least the additional tonality, the textural difference connects the left and the right side of the painting. And I hope it does a good enough job of telling the story that there are some winter trees there without overdoing. And I've still maintained a nice light glow here just above the bridge. Most of the midtones are on the painting now. Not all of them, but a large proportion. So now I can begin to think about planning out my darkest darks. I know they're all gonna happen here. These light standards, these figures that I've made up, they're not in the photo, but I've sort of composed little groupings of people on the top rail, just so that I can introduce some darker shapes. Then I have to figure out a way of introducing some darks in the balustrade and the bridge detail in the front, but not back there. A little bit of work in the water, but as little as I can do will be best. And I'm wondering if I made the top of the sky dark enough. Perhaps it could use just a little additional bounce. I'm not sure. I wasn't going to put any sense of clouds, obviously. I think a foggy day, that's dense, mysterious feeling is what can sell it, but there can be some subtle suggestion of banks of mist and clouds within the fog. I just think it needs a little textural difference at the top. And as I'm blabbing, I'm trying to think of the best way to do that. I think this, my mist bottle, will be my friend here. So what I'm doing, just misting this, adding some water. Then I'll take another one of these mop brushes, not the biggest one, but a mid-sized one, a number 4. And a light version of this mineral violet. I'm going to wash over the buildings in part and just try to make some of these subtle banks of clouds. Not very graceful shape, so the mist bottle I can bring back into service, soften up some of those edges, encourage some of those shapes to run together, tilt it up, maximize gravity. So anyway, the end result, the effect of that is really pretty subtle. It added just a little bit of value to the top of the painting. It obscures the tops of this building in particular. I wanted to obscure just a little bit more, or have it melt up into the sky just a little bit more. And it washed away the tops of those buildings, honestly, a little bit more than I wanted, but that's an easy fix. But yeah, I think overall it needed that. A little more weight at the sky helps intensify the brightness down there, and also helps make the top of the buildings look a little bit more mysterious still. is all pretty subtle stuff, but it's one of those things that watercolor can do so well. Watercolor can shout or it can whisper, and both can be very powerful. If you either know what you're doing or you're very lucky. Sometimes it's a combination of both. Generally, I think I know what I'm doing, but that doesn't mean I can always do it, or it doesn't guarantee it will always come out well. I almost always know what I want to do. I don't always nail it though, and I don't necessarily always have the skill I want, but I think it's a lesson for me, maybe for all of us, to have these artistic ambitions that are just slightly exceed what we know we're able to achieve, and then just reach a little bit higher. And sure enough, painting by painting, you get better. Then continue to raise your ambitions, and you continue to get better. But the worst thing, at least for me to do, is to say, well, I've painted something like that before, so I know I can do that again. All right, while I'm philosophizing, I'm building up some of these subtle clouds in the sky, and not 100% sure I needed to do that. They're fine, but I think I'm going to soften the bottom layers. So just some general water. That'll just keep everything nice and fluid. I'm going to have to let this dry for a minute. I don't want to use the hairdryer. Using a hairdryer tends to blow the pigment out of the crevices of this very textured paper, and so that means your washes can dry flat and develop streaks that you don't want. So I'm going to let this air dry, and then I will come back in a couple of minutes and finish up.